Right, okay. Right, so hi. I've got an Irish accent, slightly English, so if I'm hoping you'll understand what I'm saying. My name is Joyce. I work as a developer advocate for a company called Mendeley. The reason I'm here today is because our mother company is Elsevier, so a local company. So I thought I'd come and tell you a story about taking ownership of a bunch of legacy APIs. So this isn't really a technical talk. This is more of a cautionary tale. How many of you are working in a startup right now? Okay. Would some of those startups be younger than 3 years? Possibly, right? Okay, roughly. So I've considered renaming this Tragic Tales from the Microservice Trenches, right? So I'll give you a bit of background. So when you work in the world of research, you have to wear many hats. So you have to showcase your impact. You have to get money and funding to do your research. You got a lot of admin duties. So the one thing that you don't actually really get to do is your research, the thing that you're really passionate about doing. So we were founded 7 or 8 years ago by 3 researchers, Dutch. There was one, I think the money guy was from Netherlands. And so we created this like free academic software called Mendeley, which allows researchers to manage their papers and their reference management, right? So there's a desktop, the client, there's a web client, there's a mobile client. But we got bought out by Elsevier, so just in case some of you don't know, they own a lot of the medical sciences and academic research papers. So we're kind of one of the many components that Elsevier is building at the moment to really help researchers manage their research. So, we're currently building recommender systems. You read this paper and he's reading that one, you should talk to him. So, but I'm here to talk to you about how an API has helped us achieve some of our goals, and it actually just got us ready to be able to do it. So we released version 1 of our API in September the 1st, version 1 in September 2014. It's a public API built on REST principles, formatting our data into JSON. We built it on a drop wizard framework. I'll tell you about that later. And basically, it's microservices. But we didn't do it because it was trendy. There was a reason to why we picked drop wizard framework at the start. We've got multiple data sources, a really old MySQL database that we cannot change one of the biggest tables because Amazon don't have an instance big enough. So we've got this really horrid MySQL database. We've got HBase, obviously. But we didn't always have kind of a nice API. And I was part of the leadership team that built what's out there, and I hate what we have, but it's better than what was there, right? So just a little bit of background. So the more popular that Mendeley became, it was a small startup, and they were just building everything as quickly as they possibly can, and they weren't really thinking about anything. They just needed to get their slice of the pie, and they were seen as being really disruptive, and they really pissed off Elsevier at the time. So they were a small startup, and they were trying to get a slice of the pie. So if you're a product manager, this is what we were saying. Oh, you can't have that feature, We can only release once every 6 months. We can't add a column to the database because it's got so big, we can't do it. And we can't do real-time sync because, we've got mobile clients and you have the offline use case. And if we did real-time sync, everything would collapse and fall apart. But the problem we had is we had 2 monoliths, right? So we had I'll tell you, so we had to understand both of them before we could make an informed decision. So we had a monolithic PHP application, which had 2 APIs, an XML one that our biggest client, the desktop, used, and this small one that we decided we'd just build for the fun because we realized we could run a competition and, scientists might use it. But we didn't really think about this, and some third-party people used it, and we had a little developer portal that we never updated and no one used. But these were really tightly coupled, right? So the other thing is, so you had 2 APIs in a PHP stack. Nothing could be released independently. We also had an unmodifiable database. So I'm looking at numbers with a really poor data model. So one of our key resources is a document, right? So it's metadata about a PDF, like a research paper. It has 11 tables on 2 shards, with most tables having in excess of 500 million rows and quite a few at 1 billion, right? So bit of a problem, and the sharding really didn't help. Basically, this was like 7 years of like all this organic growth happening. And we decided we'd tackle the monoliths. So we decided we'd dig our Indiana Jones and go on an archaeological dig. So, because for me, one of the only real places you can get what an application does is either in its tests or in its source code, right? You would think. But see, a lot of our experts had left. The code had changed hands many times. There was no documentation. So the only place we really had left to go was the code, right? So we went on a dig, and what did we find? So we had different methodologies, right? So we had 7 years of this organic growth, and there was several kind of hand-rolled custom MVC layers, and you could see in the code somewhere where someone decided there was something else that they should try, and they tried all sorts of things. So there was like different approaches to software development over a number of years. Custom MVC frameworks. So you had bootstrapping of the application in the code. You had it in config files. Some of them were YAML, some of them were XML, so it was just horrific. The fix me's and to-dos. So if you see this in code, this tells you that refactoring is never a priority, right? So whoever checked it in, fire them. Well, don't speak extreme. Spaghetti junction, so it was like internal routing logic was really difficult to understand, and because there was no test coverage, you didn't really know if the code was being executed. So the only thing, the only thing you knew that was if it ran when you pulled the code away, it was fine, it wasn't being used. But because our release cycles were every 6 months, we didn't really release very often, right? And then the dead code, right? So you never knew what was actually being executed, so you had nothing to tell you what was going on. But we invested so much in it, right? So I bet you some of you are going, we can't get rid of it because we've spent so much time and money on it, and maybe we can fix it, right? So you start bargaining, right? You think maybe we can cope. Maybe there is a way through this mess, right? We've all done this, right? But the problems we had, it just kept getting worse, right? So you had 7 years of organic growth. And you had business logic split over 2 APIs. One was an XML RPC API. One was it wasn't REST. It was, let's just say, JSON and a bunch of crappy endpoints. And so it was split. And then there was the PHP code base. So you didn't really know what it was intended to do or what it was meant to do, with no independent release cycles. So it was all munged and tied together. Inconsistent standards, right? So we had different naming and nomenclatures for the same concept. So, and we've done it again recently in one of our other APIs. We've actually got 2 like disciplines and subject areas, and we've done it again, right? So you keep making these mistakes, right? And I'm sitting trying to tell them, oh my God, you're doing it again. So really, it's really upfront. I think it's really important to have your data dictionary and have your nomenclatures right, so that you're all talking about the same things. So we had it like categories in one, and I don't know, it was called subjects in another endpoint. So it makes it really hard to have conversations around a domain. We had a version 1 for 7 years. Because the desktop team used the XML RPC, they knew everything about it. They knew all of its quirks. So they never needed to advocate changing it, right? Because they knew what to do and how to work with it. So 7 years version 1. So we didn't have a versioning. Well, we did have a versioning strategy. Just don't change it. So the API was never really treated like a product. So the reason we had this other JSON one was we had a lot of valuable data. We've got a really massive catalog of crowdsourced research papers. So Elsevier has all the legal stuff, and we have all the grey literature, the stuff that never gets published. So that's really valuable for people, because just because it doesn't get into a journal doesn't mean the research is not useful. So basically, they created this other endpoint for a competition and realized it might be valuable. So you had now your main client. So this is the privileged citizens point. So don't write different endpoints for different clients, right? Because you'll always get, if you have one privileged citizen, they will own your ass on that API, right? So they're never going to advocate changing it. And then, of course, one of the APIs just didn't really have any clients, so it just sat there and became a bit of a mess. So at this point, everyone in the company, and I think what I'm trying to tell you is try and tune into what I'm saying. You might recognize where you are in your own company in this. It's depression, right? You get the problem is so big, you know, you're never going to be able to fix it. You know, it's like, how do you eat an elephant? You know, it's just too big a problem. You can't even think about it. But nobody was prepared to make any tough decisions. And this is, I think, the serious point of this is that you have to accept the problem, right? So this is all about taking ownership and accepting that you do have a problem. Often it's the developer teams that have to suffer because the senior management don't accept it. They're like, we've got a roadmap of nice shiny features that we have to do. You have to just learn to deal with it. But you do actually have to come to a point where you have to get a bunch of people together and go, we can't fix it, right? So we might as well just roll up our sleeves and get on with it, right? There is a way out of this mess, but we have to agree we're going to do it. So we started to take ownership of the problem. So we started to break the front end from the back end, and what we wanted to do was avoid the monolith again. So we had created a small XP team, a platform team, where we had pairs of people working on individual services. So you know, you didn't have this like just this monolithic team just building whatever they wanted. So we had all these independent teams. We had a DevOps guy. We started to build our infrastructure around monitoring, deployment. So we used Jenkins for all of that. You know, we have the Elm stack and all of that goodness. So we then start to build up some of our centralized common components, such as our own wrappers for bootstrapping our own stuff. Then we began to turn our attention to rewriting the two legacy APIs. And so what we had to do was go back to the drawing board and go, well, no one knows all of the requirements. So we just were like, well, what do you think it should do? So we went and talked to a lot of the developer teams. And what we thought was, when we talked to them, this was kind of around the time Swagger had existed, but it wasn't being used in the API upfront design way at the time. So we were kind of using wikis and conversations and just spinning up little drop services with Swagger and to talk about the endpoint and saying, is this okay, is this? So we finally got to treat the API as a product, and we were going to enable the teams. So and we decided to hire someone to be the owner of the API at the time, and that was me. And we began to write some endpoints. But the problem with us is these are all of our key kind of concepts, but they're all connected, right? So that's connected to that, that's connected to that, that's connected to that, that's right? So everything's connected. Because we thought we could actually just vertically slice and take, well, we'll take documents and we'll do documents. And then but when you did documents, it meant you had to do groups. And when you took groups, it meant you had to do folders. And if you took that, you had to do that. So basically, we had to big bang it, right? So we had to get it all done. And we spent a year writing this API. So we had to lift and shift this awful data model. Everything's connected. I'll tell you more about that later. But so we had to spend a year just rebuilding this. The team grew. But we now have separate services, and we've got every service accesses one database table or set of tables for that particular feature. So we have more fine-grained control now. So the whole point was we wanted to get all of our clients behind one API, so we can then start making the changes to the underlying data storage. So but when we were writing our APIs, right, so we never done REST, you know, we went to the conferences and we read the books and, you know, we kind of thought we were doing, you know, what we knew what we were doing. But the actual reality is when we put out our new shiny endpoints and we were like, ta-da! The reality is really, really very different. So your first client is absolutely going to hate you, right? It really is. I had some really vile conversations with some of our, and I don't blame them because we didn't really, instill a lot of trust in them, right? So they really didn't like us. So we were like, oh, do you want this one? And they're like, no. We said, no, we don't like that one. Maybe we should put, you know, double resources. No, I read a piece. We shouldn't do double. We should just do single. Oh, where should we put the ID? What if there's more? So you're having all these, but we kept creating the endpoints, throwing them away. They're trying to migrate onto this new API. And every week we were like, no, we changed our mind, right? So there was no trust. They did no trust that we didn't know what we were doing. And we didn't. So we hadn't a clue what we were doing. So that was really a big trust issue. So you won't make them care about your new API. They don't give a rat's ass because they have an API that works for them. They know everything about it. It does exactly what they want. So they're, what was I going to say? So yeah, they won't care about it until you get rid of the other one, right? So you have to do that. You will compromise on design. So because we inherited a really grotty old data model, it's really great to have your, you know, idealistic, restful head on and what you want to do, but we had to carry this awful data model, and that's leaked out into our API. So you will have to compromise on design. You will have client-specific behavior because we had Android, iOS, desktop. So you will have specific behavior. So in one instance, so that our desktop client wouldn't have two back-end storages, a local one and one of ours, we had to find a way around that just to help them. So you will have to kind of deal with that, I think. You will feel REST symmetry because it's really difficult, you know, the way the get and the post are meant to look the same, but creating a resource and updating a resource are really rather different. So for us, you can only update a subset of a profile. So we've got this concept of a profile amendment, but then when you get a profile, you get everything. So REST symmetry is really difficult. Like with any of this stuff, it's not set in stone, so find what works for you, but don't be a slave to that. And this was you will feel it will never end. If you have 7 years of organic growth, it will be a really long, hard year and a half to get something out because it's like whack-a-mole. No one knows what it should be doing, and you think you've covered all the corner cases, and you've got a really long time to kind of work out pagination strategies, versioning strategies, all of that other kind of stuff. And then, you know, you're missing, you realize when you deploy it, there's a feature that you didn't know existed. So you have to like try and write something for that really quickly and deploy it. So, but do not despair. There will come a day when you will get your version 1 of your new API out. So at the moment, what we have now is we've got consuming clients. We've got quite a few now. So, you know, our main privileged citizen, such as it was at the time, is now also consuming the same APIs as our web front ends, our iOS clients and all of that. We've got quicker deployments. Again, I'll give a cautionary warning later on about that. But yeah, you know, we can generally deploy quite a lot every day to production. We've got a versioning strategy. I believe the new team have decided to change that. But there is one there. I think mostly what I see at conferences, no one cares about which versioning strategy. Just pick one and do it, whichever is easier for you. Dog fooding. So this is a big thing that we never had. We had an API that we were not dog fooding. So now we are dog fooding, and I think that's really, really important. Don't be writing custom APIs for particular clients. We have a developer portal that's kept up to date by me, and we have SDKs in Python is the big one that researchers love. So we've got some of our SDKs, and you know, we've got the iOS one out there and the JavaScript one. But Oh yeah, we still can't retire the old XML one. I don't think we flipped the switch in it because there's still certain pages in the monolith somewhere that is being serviced by it. We still can't change the data model because, well, no one's really prioritizing it at the moment, I think, until everything gets turned off. But we are in a better position than we were before. So I'm going to leave you with some of the final kind of just thoughts that I think we've learned. And I've updated this recently because we're just learning loads about it. So I did this talk first in API Strategy and Practice Conference in Berlin last spring. And like I could write a whole another one of these, I should. I think the biggest thing is focus people on the long term, particularly in APIs. The minute it goes out the door and there's a consuming client, that's it, right? It's out there and it's going to be really difficult to change. So you need to focus on the long term, always prepare for a second client. The architecture we had at the time didn't really allow us to evolve to support multiple clients. So think long term. You really have to just think about long term thinking. It's the biggest lesson I would say about this. Software is not an asset. The more of it you have, it doesn't mean it's a great thing because it's monitoring, it's expensive, it's people's time looking after it. We spent, I think, the first 2 years before we wrote the API just pulling out all this like Voldemort, MongoDB, all of this stuff. Just basically, the more of you don't, it's just the least amount of software you need, the better. Yes, so make your services disposable. So if you are doing microservices, we built 100 services at the time, probably threw away about 20. Remember I was saying just because we wrote it, don't bargain with it, throw it away. The thing now that's happened with us is we've got monolithic microservices. So I think one of our biggest ones is about 90,000 lines of code, if not more. I'll talk about something around that, but I think you really need to think about your microservices. I think where we went wrong is because we have our domain model is broken. It meant that some of these are rather big. Recognize when it is too big. When it is too big, throw it away. Recognize client pain. Remember your first client, they won't like you at all. You need to recognize them. So they had an API that worked, right? It was XML RPC. And then we said, but you've got to use headers and you've got to understand how to parse headers and linking, paginate through link headers. And they're like, what? Why are you doing that? So we never explained to any of them what REST is. And people think they know what REST is. It's not. It's really difficult, right? It's an entire specification. Read the spec, make sure it's the right spec you're reading. So we didn't tell them or educate them. So set their expectations beforehand. And educate them. They think they know what it is, but they never will. Test your chosen versioning strategy. We never tested it. Turns out it's really hard. So we picked content negotiation for the first one. And so we have a lot of ill-behaved clients making wildcard calls. It's their problem, but we didn't make the implications of that really clear up front. I think now they're going to start putting versioning in the URL, which personally I do not like. But whatever trick you pick, do a dry run, make sure you can make a change and find what works for you. Anticipate ill-behaved clients, and they will take shortcuts. So people, the LeaseWeb guys, the API gateway, make sure your wildcards are off or on, whatever works for you. Think about the life cycle of your resources. So because for us, everything is connected, we have this thing about, this is really about distributed transactions, and I'm not going to get into this because it's really difficult, but we have like services calling other services for either querying and or deleting resources. So, and there are lots of interconnected resources, and it's really, really difficult. Again, bad data modeling design, I think. So if you have a peer-to-peer relationship where either or both sides can exist, then you need to find a mechanism of informing each side of the relationship about each other, I think is what I'm trying to say. The parent-child relationship that we have everywhere is quite damaging, so be careful. Well, it's difficult. So deep coupling, that's, I guess, what it is really. All right, so the amount of developers I get that go, what verb should we use and what should the endpoint look like? This is not it, right? This is going back to taking your Evans's domain-driven design book out and reading about DDD and understanding bounded contexts and really thinking about your domain up front. The endpoint is the last thing you should be thinking about. The verb, the last thing you should be thinking about. You need to think about your domain, where the boundaries are, how they will talk to other systems in your domain. A really awesome book, if you've not read it and you're going to do microservices, is Sam Newman's book. He's a thought worker, and it's quite an easy read. It's short, but it's really quite good. Don't let your deployment architecture affect your API. So this is a recent one someone told me. So what do we have? So basically we've decided to separate, we have a concept of a news feed and we've separated out parts of it into long running kind of processing and short-lived ones. So now you've got two systems, and we've leaked that out into the APIs. So this is going back to your domain, right? So just think about that. So now we've got two endpoint APIs taking up a URL namespace, kind of the same thing, but they're just like, because it's a processing thing, but now you've got two of them and it's like, what? So think about that. So yeah, this is, I think, so what we had is we had a core platform team all working on building all of the stuff that we needed. And we have a Mendeley drop wizard resource for bootstrapping. But we started to separate out all of our teams and we can't fork the Mendeley drop wizard component. So now all of the 8 or 9 teams that we have to upgrade at the same time. So, or not upgrade. So I think we have 80 registered services. This is not including other artifacts. So we've had a massive growth spurt since Elsevier bought us out because they've got lots of money. And so one of the key benefits in microservices is you can easily let something rot and throw it away, but we can't do that now with Mendeley Drop Wizard because we've split out all of our teams and they all have to share the same artifact that comes out of Jenkins. So just be really careful about when you are breaking up your teams, think about how the build is going to work with all of your teams. And I think basically, what this is my talk is based around this, which is the Kubler-Ross model of grief, which is denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I think everyone goes through these steps in a team when they have to own awful code and they have big problems. So I think it's just a way that we had of describing the thoughts we went through. So hopefully you'll recognize it and you can move on to the next one. Anyway, that's me. Thank you for listening. Thanks. Any questions? Hi. Hi. It's blinding up here.
So you mentioned you do not like the version numbers in URLs.
Yeah.
Then what would be your preferred approach?
Content negotiation. I think, so hypermedia is a thing, like it is a thing, it's happening, people are using it. I think if you want to be able to afford changes to other resources and navigate through this kind of URL space, content negotiation is one way of doing that. I find with the versioning in the URL, it's not really identifying a resource on a network at a time. It's just my preference. I think I don't like that you have that because I think people will get tied to that version. And I think the point being, if you kind of make it loose, you can kind of leave the endpoint the same and you can kind of change the underlying representation of the data that gets passed back. So I'll tell you what I'm interested in by saying, here's the content types I'm interested in, and you get back what you want, but you don't have to worry about that. It's just my preference. It's what we rolled out, but we didn't test it, and it turns out we probably would have been able to do it and it'd be a lot easier. I've seen a lot of companies go, including Stack Overflow, from URL-based versioning to content negotiation, as have GitHub. I have not seen them go backwards, but I'm not looking after the code base, so if they feel it makes their lives easier, it's but pick one and stick with it, I think.
Can I ask, maybe I understood it wrong, that you mentioned the tool, Drop Wizard, or not?
Drop Wizard.
Can you explain what it is?
Yeah, it's basically for building microservices. It takes all the best bits. Oh my God, I've got a complete blank on me now. Oh, no, it's fine. I've had 2 beers, three beers. It's a framework, and it has like Jackson for JSON and stuff like that, and it's got a HTTP Jetty engine in it. There's the words. So it's just quite a small print, but it allows you. Then you can use annotations to annotate your services. So this is a get one, and here's the inputs it takes and stuff. So it's quite lightweight. But we didn't pick it because it was trendy. At the time, we had a big nightmare operational thing, and the only way we could carve out the biggest pain points was replacing it with small independent services that we could test and deploy easily. So that's why we.
Is it worthwhile to look into?
Yeah, but I would say there's a bit of a backlash against microservices in some senses of like everyone thinks, oh, it's cool, it's trendy, let's do it. It's really, really difficult, right? Distributed transactions in HTTP is really, really difficult. So if it makes sense, do it, but yeah. Yeah. Okay.
More questions? Well, thank you, Joyce.
Thanks.